Hi, this is Samir, and this is the Fall Quarter 2016 update video for the ARS Sprint Planning project in the ARS SIG, which is part of the Design, Technology, and Research section of the Delta Lab at Northwestern. So, just to get started, I'm going to do a quick overview of my sprint. So I'm not gonna, it might be a little bit shaky on which sprint is when, but just gonna go over like the progress of the quarter and then the end result of the next steps. So quick progress is just like beginning sprint 0 worked on the sprint log. So one thing we did was like hide task and show tasks, which is from over the summer, which is really useful just to see like high level what are your stories and what are you trying to accomplish, because with all the tasks in there, there's a lot to go off of. And then this idea of milestones, so like toggling between milestones and tasks. So a milestone is something that if you complete, you like complete the story or deliver value, versus tasks, which is something we're still kind of experimenting with. And just gave the option, and then we finally added burn down. So burn down is this idea is that like if I have zero point 0.5 hours supposed to take 0 0.5 hours, it'd be burned out 100. If I did one, it'd be 200%, and it doesn't go over 200. And if it was like 0.25, it'd be 50%. So just like showing you how many points you're actually spending to how many you've committed. So those were the new sprint planning sheets. Pretty exciting in that aspect. For the first sprint, I also like Sprint Zero. I also made a sprint planning guide. Just thought it would be useful um, to like show something like this. So this was like helpful for me to get my thoughts down. I don't think anyone's actually looked at this. I did like show it to like Alicia and Hauchi, I believe, but just like what does it look like? What is your research question? What is your claims? Like what does that research tree look like? Just the idea of like having a research tree. So this one is actually really interesting because it it is based off a previous learning module, and I try to break it down. But it's not exactly actually what it ends up being. So this is actually kind of interesting to show like the iteration design. This is what it looks like first with claims, design arguments, design needs, and user needs, and just showing like the planning tree, which is like epic story, milestone, task, which is more sprint level. Um, Kind of the big thing I realized here is that research and like sprint planning is for planning, and research is like the content or your goals or what you're trying to figure out. So that was like the key distinction with actually writing this guide. Um, One of the first things I did, which is based off last quarter's work, was like make a timing interface. So I'm just gonna like start this, but um, it's longer. I just reduced the time to show like what are the different sections, but like thinking through your sections of sprint planning. So like I try to add a little bit more about like how to see it at a high level. So I was like, write out your research questions, write out your design arguments, and that is like longer time. It was kind of difficult. I had to use this interface myself, and I found it difficult just to write those on the spot. Like it does require quite a bit of time before you can just like write them and it gets time. So like having those, you need to have those like kind of prepared though, because if you don't have them, it like what we realized at our last interface is yes, like these to-dos were nice and like they're written like quickly and students finished the planning and thought their prioritization and etc. in slices, but they didn't actually like they may not have done things that were directly related to the research. So that was kind of like the goal. And then as you can see here, it goes on to like writing the to-dos. But like this is my question. These were my two design arguments, not really worded that well. So that was like just learning from that. So maybe like sticking away from something of that nature. I'm gonna close this because I think the code's not working right. So kind of what I did after that was like synthesis of user needs. So like what were like big user needs? Like we've done 2 quarters of work. What have we learned? What have other people learned? What they learned from the paper? So I kind of listed out what was learned in the paper that Hauchi and others had written about ARS, and then just went through like our write up, Amani and my write up from winter quarter, like what we thought, what are our learnings, like spring quarter, what did we learn for each interface, and then like major insights from previous research, just whatever synthesis we had before. So that was sprint 0, and I believe if that was sprint 0, so sprint Sprint 1, a lot of focus on like interviewing people and understanding like their needs and stuff. So um, this was just like going through again, like doing more need finding, and really just answering how she had like prompted me questions. So like thinking more generally and broadly. So like what is hard about sprint planning for research? How do we teach it currently, and why do we teach it the way we do? Like, what are we going to change? I took an excerpt from the paper, like, what's wrong with what we teach it and why. So, like, I wrote down, like, possible problems and then, like, technology to fix them or, like, address them, I guess. Like, categorize them in this section. Um, just kind of thought about like a lot of reliance on sig meetings and how like there's not a lot of like higher level and higher level I'm going to change to goals later, but like higher level planning in terms of like what does your overall picture for your research look like, and what's hard, like time estimation, etc. So this was like a good kind of user, like getting an understanding of what are the user needs and like how we can address them. So this is tech in Firefox. The reason it's in Firefox because D3 doesn't like cross-origin stuff. Firefox says it's okay. So um, the idea is just like it's actually interesting to see this, but how I broke it down. But you write in your research question. For your question, you can have lots of claims. So there's like a tree for your claim. You could have some design arguments. Um, sorry, there should be design arguments. Design arguments. You can see as two there, but I'll redo it. So yeah, design arguments, and then for a design argument, you can have like a story that addresses it. So this is actually kind of interesting because I was like, okay, for every story you're like addressing a design argument. Um, and that was like kind of how I thought about it for a while. Like, okay, you have a question, you have a claim, you have a design argument, and then you have like a story. And your stories have tasks. I didn't include that in here. And then like this tree just like does stuff like of that nature. But it's kind of interesting because I was mixing, despite the fact that I had two different trees, I was mixing the research tree, and we'll call it the planning tree. But the planning tree is just like your sprint, your stories, and your like we're still figuring out milestones and tasks. But beyond that, kind of like made my interface. So like as you can see here, I had research question, research claim, design argument, story, and milestones. So like we saw that like for each, and I guess it made sense intuitively. Like for every design argument, you're working towards a design argument for every story and milestone, which is like interesting. So just like the status, so like, and this is kind of like your canvas per se, but like the status would be like what you know, what you want to know and what you don't know, which is a little confusing for people, but I did like kind of like just like really like draw out my design fully, and like see like what the interface can do and what it can't do, what we want it to do. So like good for planning at a high level, um, connects all the layers. So like the goal is really connecting the whole thing together for this interface. I wrote down some measure success. Didn't exactly do this correctly, I'd say. So I wrote down like uh, what the measure success for the interface were, not necessarily the user. So like I wrote these out. They were pretty in depth, so not bad in terms of that. But I guess the lens was a little wrong. But did write all these out. And I made a test plan. So my test plan was basically like here I was trying to see like I didn't want it to be top down or bottom up, so like I tested it a lot of different ways, thought about like possible examples. So I wrote an example on the board with the research question, claim, design argument, story, and milestone. Still kind of iffy the difference between research question, design argument, so that became more clear later. And then like possible ways interfaces to show it, so I did top down or like right heavy or like left heavy, so on the board. So I can show that in a little bit. So this is a test with, I'm gonna mute it, but like, and it's at 2 times speed, but it's with Greg. So we're going really fast, but just like the important part was like linking everything. So that was like really what I wanted to see, and like how people wrote it and how it works. So I did whiteboard it just because there was a lot of information, and like making the tech for that I didn't think was worth it until I could like see it. But the links were interesting. So like just the fact that like I tested the like three people, and one of the users said like it was obvious to me their links were weak. I mean, in this test, I think these two were weak because like one talked about learning sciences, uh, one like the research question about learning sciences, and the claim had nothing to do with learning sciences. So there was like there's a clear disconnect from a human level that I could understand. Beyond just like the structure of writing a design argument, a story, or a milestone, and it was confusing with this what we know, what we don't know, and what we want to know. That was like definitely really confusing because people like wouldn't write what they don't know because they don't know it. So it was a little bit confusing in that aspect. So I do have like the measures here. I just wrote them down like how they did on the interface, but I didn't really write like what they learned. I got a bit of their cognitive thought in the notes section, but like beyond that, nothing too much like on what they can do or what the colors meant, and etc. Um, so for sprint three, like really thinking about the user is like kind of what we came to. So like, what are the represented tasks? So like, I wrote them out. I wrote down like what are the different levels. So like, what can a novice researcher do versus like an advanced student in DTR? So like level one, a novice I'd say was level two, but just like being able to connect components at all levels, users should be able to do that, or like express completed planning components in the interface, express previous learning. So I kind of just went through and did that. Like as it went on, the excuse me, the levels like a little less detail because I focused on the first few. I think this was all right in terms of like what I wanted them to do, but I think like in terms of writing needs, I could have been a bit better. But basically wrote this out. Wanted to do like a test plan on like based off their sprint plan on how actionable and stuff they are based off what I gave them. I ended up not doing this. I think this was like kind of the impasse in my project where I had my mid-quarter wrap up, and Hauchi and I discussed about not necessarily doing smaller tests because that's what I've been doing, but like it's time to do the whole system design, which I like didn't quite understand, and I was really just like, it's test, it's build, just do some more like small tests. And I think like, of course, there's small tests, but I think it was the time to like put everything together. So I think that was still sprint three at some aspect. It might have been like halfway through. So I came to kind of the SIG meeting with this new idea. So kind of this idea of a research canvas. So like I took what I learned from before and just like made a PowerPoint. So I didn't make an interface, and just like showing like maybe in Google Docs, but well, maybe not Google Docs, but it having a sidebar, kind of the columns that I had before. So I remember if it was like questions, claims, and I added evidence. So evidence was really interesting because I thought I'm just like, we do all this work, but like, what are the claims actually like? How do you prove claims? And it's like evidence, I think that was like a big, it's like a big breakthrough, I'd say, because Hauchi I think really thought it was good because that like research isn't about like doing stories or doing sprints. It's about gathering evidence to prove your claims, which answer your questions, right? So evidence wasn't really something in the ARS setting explicitly in this planning aspect, but it became something we talk about a lot now. Kind of just I would say high level, but didn't put in really details. So like for next time, really put in details and show like what would go in these things. Like the sidebar was for instructions and maybe like having videos and etc. of things. Just like filling out your questions, your claims, your evidence. Linking between, if you see this, questions and claims. So like what claims answer those questions. And then like design arguments, I thought were like the links between claims and evidence. So like it is something I got from maybe like user talking, like is like it was not talking, excuse me, like interviews, like testing with one of the users with the last whiteboard interface was that it was like the connection between abstract and concrete, which I agreed with because like evident like but didn't actually work in this setting because he was talking about stories, which were the concrete thing, not so. But basically, just claims were more abstract, and then design arguments would be like what really explicitly it was. But just kind of did a bit more stuff, added some color, like what is new. So like this canvas shows like what was old and what is new. So I think that was an interesting idea because it shows what you've learned before and what you're wanting to learn later. And then like there's this interesting concept of how things relate to each other. So like you can actually prove one design argument without doing something else, or you can't gather some evidence without gathering some evidence before. So those are the red arrows. Something I actually should look back at for next quarter to see if that's something interesting. Breaking it down, evidence into milestones. So like what are how would you want to achieve the learning basically? So like adding points and stuff like of that nature. Might go back to this for evidence, but we'll see. Still trying to figure out how to break that down. But really kind of table that for a little bit later. But just like the idea of like you write it in your canvas, and then in your canvas, this slide is mostly like putting it like inserting it straight into your sprint planning sheet, and then like maybe you gotta flag them for mentor feedback. So like another thing here was just like what can users do with this interface was like what the next step was, and then like what is the system capable of, and like the system really like did a lot. Most of it was just like providing the user with instruction and stuff like that, so not as much use like system like feedback and like affordances in that aspect, and that's something I struggled with later, but I'll just go through this real quick. I wrote some other possible things, and then questions for Hachi and Lisha. So then, based off that, I think I made this interface. So Hachi had said you can make anything in Google Sheets, so it's kind of interesting what I made, but I'm gonna freeze this row real quick. Um, so um, kind of the idea is like you have a question, and then you have like a claim, and then you have like your evidence for this question, and then like just the tech here is just like um, this is like sorry, just like linking them with X's. So it's actually pretty quick. I didn't want to have clicks, and like you're already typing, so it's actually quite nice. And then if you imagine, you can do like more stuff like this, um, and stuff of that nature, and like the color is determined by the left side. So like if you could imagine, like there are two columns here, but like one possible issue is just like if we do something like this, it like overwrites itself because it's purple on it. But if we put in like 10 columns in here and have only 10 colors, we can like route things better and like spread things out, and hopefully things don't crisscross. So that's not a big deal. Um, so kind of like this was the tech, and then like the next thing was like filling it out with stuff. So really thinking about like what planners need to do and like what help they need and things of that nature. I struggled with that a little bit. So like my next thing here was like I read the I was thinking about opportunistic planning, and the paper was pretty like comprehensive in its like human I believe it's human the human planning process by Roth Hayes. So it was really comprehensive, so I went through. So like the really interesting thing is like planning, really focused on planning. So like just the idea that it's formulating an intended course of action to achieving a goal. And like I think the biggest issue was like goal for DTR students is like what is their goal. Like I think they can breakdown, I think they're capable of doing, and I think they can follow their plan. But and breakdown, I guess we're still to kind of figure out how well they do that. But what exactly is their goal? And like because right now, like based off like answering the questions from before about like what is the problem is like high reliance on mentors and sig meetings to like guide projects. And then there's idea of control, which is like how to guide your plan, but I kind of tabled that for later. So kind of just went through like there's a lot of planes and stuff, but I just copied a lot of like screenshot a lot of things just to see like just to get a better idea. So I like screenshotted a lot of that paper, and then wrote down some representative tasks, and then just the idea of like goals. So what are like your goal for research? And I wrote down four goals. Is like one is like hypothesize novel design arguments, which is true. And then build techniques to prove design arguments was the second goal. So I actually added this. This was like something I added to the Canvas Social Show, which was like, what are like you have your claims or your design arguments that answer your questions, but how like what executes those claims, and those are like your techniques, and your techniques execute them. Like those are the mechanisms, I'd say, and then your evidence proves the outcomes of your claims as well as your mechanisms. So another goal is like gathering evidence, and then the fourth one, which is really the first one I said, is like determining novel research questions. Really, what students need help here, I think, is like the design arguments for sure, like writing those out, and then like their techniques. I think is a matter of like brainstorming and thinking through those and how to improve them. I think students actually do well at like optimizing those. That's just a hypothesis, but I believe like that's much easier than coming up with a design argument. And then the third goal, gathering evidence, is still something I have to like think through cognitively a bit more, but like just have a basic idea, but I think I need to do a little bit more like literature research on this. And then like determining novel research questions is the most scaffolded thing, just because like uh, in the setting right now, like students come in doing basically design tech projects, and like research is like a little bit on the sidelines. So like the question or like the thing that you're trying to do is novel, but like writing that question uh, or like determining it, I guess, is not a big issue. But writing, what is it called? Uh, like you have to write the format out for it. So kind of went on with this. So really focused on goals, and then so I made my new canvas. It didn't go so well, I guess, because I didn't have enough scaffolds for design arguments, techniques, and evidence, and like what does it mean to have good design arguments or good techniques or good evidence. It was really vague. It was really general. It didn't really like put in that effort to do that, and it was kind of interesting, right? It's like very meta. Like how do we help people scaffold through that? So I think there are some more scaffolds, but I think at its core it is a hard problem. So like maybe like let it be hard. And I think I missed this in my last interface, but I just had a sidebar explaining like what a research question is, like who can help you on it. So these all like this is actually pretty cool. Like like this will open Slack, so I can Slack people. I'm not sure if we're gonna use that ever, but something cool. And then like some scratch space that like was another thing that if you needed help like writing out the process, like questions and stuff, it can be written here. Um, so that was more stuff. I added techniques. This was all right, but I needed to get more on user needs. So I finally kind of ended up on Sprint 5, like going to two SIG meetings. So I went to two SIG meetings and I learned a lot about mentors. Actually, it was really interesting. I think I focused a lot on mentors because I want to be like kind of thinking about how can we like take away like all that like replace the mentor kind of in a system, because like you only meet like once a week for SIG meeting, and there are a lot of points you do in between then, and like the mentor doesn't know everything, and there needs to be like some support beyond that. So I really thought about how to like I wrote down a lot of things, and I wrote formatting my user needs. So I actually was just like, how do you write a user need? Found this interesting article on gov.uk. Wrote it down. I thought it was actually really helpful, so I did that. And then design arguments, I had a format for that already, so I went through mentor needs and researcher needs. Researcher being novice researcher. I think the biggest thing for the mentor was that like I noticed that like it took a while for them to understand where the project was. They spent a lot of time probing and figuring out what people had done, what uh, amount of progress had they done, what does it mean for like they asked a lot of clarifying questions like what does work mean, what does your tool do exactly, what is enough, what does the speed parameter mean. So just like the idea of supporting that. So like the idea is like the canvas, like my design argument is like the canvas will like provide a system for students and mentors to communicate clearly, and then like mentors can know what students are working on by like the color of the nodes, like they'll be green, and then if the system sees a node as red or not clear enough, then clear enough in terms of like what is written, communicated wise, then it will like give feedback and mark it red, and then the student will revise it, and then the mentor will not have to revise it later, or they'll know that it's not clear and be able to just like, hey, that's not clear, like how can we fix that. So that was like a lot of it as well. So basically like replacing low-level mentor task, and then just like providing a conceptual model for the student and the mentor to talk about their research goals before they plan. Um, Researcher needs just having that conceptual model, generating the research goals, because that is the up to the I think up to the novice researcher as much as the sick heads help. But just like things I did beyond that is like wording format, so how to format like your four goals. The four goals now, just a reader: questions, claims, sorry, questions. I said claims, but design arguments. Um, excuse me, techniques and evidence, and then like best practices for them. So like a design argument should like be measurable, etc., etc., things of that nature. Um, and then just that if it's like having a clear conceptual model, like people the like and we'll have to define it clear a little better, but people will be able to like have a more directed research effort in their planning. And then receiving feedback. So this is kind of interesting. Um, thought about peer review. So peer review and like students peer review each other, so they actually learn like through a rubric like how like to think and write about goals. And like the nice thing is that like for human computation, people are pretty smart. So like they can be given a not a vague rubric, but vague enough, and they can like connect the dots for themselves. One thing I thought for the system, I wrote down a few things. Is like if something is formatted wrong, so I wrote down like the word format from up above previously, then it should say an error. So these are system things. So we do want the system to do things as well. The text length is too short, then like there may not be enough detail, so we like mark it for revision. Uh, Qualifiers, so like enough or like every time, something of that nature, which I think possible through NLP. We can figure that out. And then clarification as a whole. So there's idea of like word senses, and like word senses per number of total words. So if you imagine that kind of ratio, if there are too many senses in a node for the number of total words, like over a threshold, if the ratio is too high, that means that like the words you're using are just like imprecise. There's just too many. There's too many ways to interpret this per se. So maybe you need to revise it. So that's like something I thought of, which would be interesting. I think something I really want to test. So I'm gonna go to my paper just to finish up. Um, like yeah, marking card sprint. Also, one thing I want to do is like have a first time usage like tutorial to kind of go through what this canvas means. Like what is the conceptual model? Like conceptual model of like evidence proves techniques, techniques execute design arguments, and design arguments answer research questions. Like that's kind of how it works. And then like prompting from the system. So like when you're filling out a node, and it's empty, like asking like what evidence do you need to prove this design argument, is like maybe the right question to ask. Or like when you're slicing, after you've marked everything for your current sprint, what is important for your research? What would you like to complete this sprint? All questions like how she asked during SIG meeting, which is just easy for the system to ask. And like I think it's like a lot more when Hauchi the mentor asks it, but it is something when if the system asks, I think it will like achieve some results. And then like revisions, how can you write this more clearly, reformat it, add more details? And I talked about revisions here as well as I talked before. But like the structure is incorrect, the length is too short, qualifiers. So I had talked about that before. And then like just a discussion is like I still have to build those techniques. I spent a lot of time doing needs and design arguments this last sprint, which I thought was really useful. I think they still need revision, but like the focus is really on like getting research goals and how to generate them and how to communicate those clearly, between like the mentor and the student, so they can get adequate feedback. Um, so really just implementing the technical systems. And another possible thing is like links between nodes. If the system can detect like what is a weak link, because I could see that as a human and like thinking like what are the measures to determine that, that would be really powerful as well. But that's kind of like the big learnings is like uh, what like the research canvas, like thinking about research goals, and then just like what are the four research goals, which are like generating questions, generating design arguments, building techniques, and then like gathering evidence are the 4 goals, and then like how to break those goals down into sprint plans, and then how can we support mentors to have like a clear understanding of what the student's progress was, so they can provide good support. Were kind of the main things I focused on. So I think overall, kind of a hard quarter because the needs were just so difficult for me to understand of like what we were trying to do. So like spending a little bit more time on that. I wish I built a little bit more tech, because the tech really I built was just like this, which is like the link. So oh yeah, I redid my design groups and needs. So this was here, but just like this kind of idea, which did take a lot of time. Oh, is it not working on this one? It works. I'll just do it on here. This, and then like maybe this like Firefox thing, which took not that much time, but I wish I did a little bit more tech. So I think that will be next quarter, but like really figuring out what the system can do with like the user's cognitive thoughts. But just wanted to say thanks, and that's it for the quarter.